To our first ever Tavern Talks. We are just now going live. Sorry for being a few minutes late. We just wanted to make sure everything was set up, ready to go, ready to kind of kick ass for you on this very first, just the camera, even a little bit, on this very first podcast that we are doing. So just taking a moment, letting people kind of get here, settle in, just so everybody kind of knows the schedule for this evening. I'll go ahead and post it over in chat. We'll be talking, kind of doing an introduction around 6:15, around 6:45. We'll be doing like introduction to the podcast, lead-ins, things like that. At 7, we will have our one-on-one guest on. That's Sir Kaltan from Amtgard, talking about their experiences over decades, talking about the game, kind of giving an overview of Amtgard, why it's a great game to play, what it's like outside of pandemic, during pandemic, and really just kind of getting into it. And then at 8 o'clock, we will move to our final segment. We will be doing On the Grind. What On the Grind is On the Grind is going to be a segment we do here on the podcast, talking to people from the game that we've introduced earlier and talking about their path, like their journey going towards their goals, what keeps them motivated, what keeps them ticking, involved, and really just kind of getting two people who are really close to obtaining whatever their major goal might be in the LARP, and talking to them very clearly about what got them there, what helped get them to that point. Tonight we'll be meeting with Oramus and Big Mac, both also from Amtgard, since today's focus is going to be on Amtgard. Just like any other content on the channel, what we're basically going to be doing is, if you have any feedback, by all means, please provide it. I will not be ignoring chat or anything like that, because we are taking the audio from this stream and we are turning it into a podcast. We're going to be following more of a podcast format. That means if people have questions, I do want you to post them in chat. You can either post them in Discord. There's a Tavern Talks section of our Discord. I'll go ahead and put the link to the Discord up now as well. You can use that link in the Discord, and you can go to the Tavern Talks section. There's a section that's open to everybody who's part of the Discord, and you can post any questions you have there during each segment, and those will definitely get answered. Also, if you want to post any chats or questions you have in the chat, we'll be monitoring the chat throughout this evening. And if there's any questions there, we'll make sure, read your name and get the question asked to the person, to myself, whatever the case may be. We don't want to interrupt the flow outside of these kind of Q&A sections, so that for people who don't watch the VOD, don't watch the video replay of the podcast, but actually choose to listen to the podcast of Tavern Talks, they'll be able to kind of follow along without necessarily needing to be able to see the chat stream. I'm going to go ahead here in a moment. I'm going to put on some music, get things kind of cooking for the next few minutes, let a few more people kind of filter in, and then we'll kick off the podcast. Like I said, we may have some bumps along the road. Hey, good to see you, Synthad. Throwing up those waving octopus emojis. Thanks for always supporting the stream. But so, we'll definitely, if there's any hiccups, you notice anything, just let me know. We'll adjust on the fly. This is our first one, so don't expect things to go perfect. Nothing ever does, but it should go pretty well. So let me switch over really quick to kind of a BRB screen, just for a few minutes while we get adjusted. Listen to a few musics while people filter in, and I'll be back at 6:45. Hey, Silenus. Hello, everybody. Thank you for holding tight and letting us get everything set up for the first ever Tavern Talks. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Tavern. So, what Tavern Talks is, I just want to kind of start off because it is our first ever podcast that we are doing this evening. So, what Tavern Talks is as a podcast, we're doing it obviously live on Twitch. These will always be live on Twitch. The replays will be put onto YouTube and also uploaded as audio content on podcasts, and you'll be able to find those wherever podcasts are found. I will make sure the details of those as they get put up are found across social media. So you may be asking, what is Tavern Talks? What Tavern Talks is a way for us to explore LARP, live action role playing games. I asked myself since the very start, when I first decided to become a streamer, when I first decided to do podcasts, really I wanted a huge focus to be on LARP. It's a huge part of my life. Unfortunately, as we all know, we were stricken with a not so wonderful plague at the very start of this year. So it's taken a lot of brainstorming and planning and figuring out what we want to do to bring LARP content. In the future, we will be able to bring crafting streams, and eventually we'll be able to bring live streaming of actual foam, rattan, steel combat, and actually start live streaming LARP. But in the meantime, we're going to be doing this podcast, and even once it starts up, doing this podcast to introduce people to different live action role playing games, the people within them, introducing a variety of concepts so that when you do get to leave your home after this pandemic, you're fully aware of the vast array of LARPs, because the LARPs, like video games, span the spectrum. You have everything from deep-seated, super in-depth character games where the story gets super deep, and kind of like you would if you were playing like a JRPG, or something along those lines. But you also have the LARPs, like Amtgard, that we'll be talking about today, that kind of really fall more within the, I guess you would say, kind of like the World of Warcraft or even the League of Legends sphere. We do have characters, we develop them, we do have role play and all of that sort of thing, but we also have a really fast-paced combat and game system where every week people can go to Amtgard to jump into these games. You level up your points, you get different abilities, you can switch between classes, just like you can kind of switch between builds in those other games. And so, I always try to find that correlation here for the podcast. So I would definitely say, Amtgard, while it has that deep, rich lore, it has that role play, the gameplay of it. It's a fun combat-based game with classes and abilities. It's got a very rich history, kind of steeped in that kind of D&D build. The actual day-to-day gameplay, again, is a lot like doing PvP arenas in World of Warcraft or League of Legends and things like that. Not the exact same, but we take a lot of headway from those games. At times, it can almost feel like an FPS. To kind of speak a little bit about myself as a host, why I'm doing this, I've been doing live action role playing games since I was, to date myself, 13. So we're going into 25 years. Actually, I think we just passed 25 years of live action role playing. My first game was Amtgard, so it made sense that we're going to start these podcasts with the game that I'm most steeped in, which is Amtgard. You can find out a lot more about Amtgard. Let me make sure I get the correct web address. I want to make sure I'm pointing everybody to the correct site. If you're interested, as we're talking about it, you want to learn more, follow along, take a look at the rules, find out if there's groups in your location. And, we'll reference this again later, is you really want to, you'll be able to go to amtgard.com. Our first guest tonight. So another thing about the flow, because it's the first time doing the podcast, we're talking about the game a little bit, talking about what Amtgard is, my connection to it. We're also going to take just a minute. We're going to do these little kind of Q&A pockets, kind of address the live chat, the people who are tuned in on twitch.tv/Loctavian. And, address them at things. And so anybody in the chat, don't think that you're being ignored. When we get to these pockets, I'll be able to address it. To that effect, Lord Silenus, hopefully I said that correctly. I go back and forth between saying your name correctly and not. Says happy LARP anniversary. Thank you so much. Means a lot. Like I said, 25 years when I'm almost 38 is a huge, it's over 2/3 of my life spent with this amazing Silenus, Lord Silenus. Thank you for the correction. Appreciate it. Your lordship. So yeah, our first guest tonight is going to be Sir Kaltan. Kaltan is kind of standing by, ready. We'll move to the next room of the tavern, so to speak, at 7. What that segment's going to be, since it is our first podcast, that segment's going to be called one-on-one. So one-on-one is the time where we really give a person who, I'm not necessarily fighting people who've been in the game for a long time. In the case of Sir Kaltan, they've spent a long time. They spent, I believe, possibly longer than I have playing Amtgard and other LARPs. But it's a chance for them to kind of talk about the LARP, why they've chosen this LARP, why they've dedicated their time to it, what makes this LARP special. So you're really going to hear about it from people's mouths to really kind of talk about their journey in the game, what they've gained from these different games, what makes these games special. And, it's kind of a way for people who are part of the game to learn more about other people within it and hear about these unique and special journeys. And for those people who might not be part of the game we're talking about, or maybe haven't ever LARPed before, to really learn more about LARP. So I do want to take a moment before we get to that segment, address chat. Thank you, everybody saying hi, Synth Juicebox Hero TV, Unum Num 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 Num, and anybody else who hasn't spoke in chat. Thank you all for tuning in for this first ever episode. Kind of before we get rolling with Sir Kaltan here in about 7 minutes or so, is there any pre-questions that you want answered, either about Amtgard or you want addressed to Kaltan? Again, throughout the interview process in our different segments tonight, I will be keeping track of all the questions. So if they don't get answered right when you ask them, and we will be able to get them then. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that it's definitely something we will be keeping track of. So just taking a few technical moments. Thank you so much for the 100 bits. Thank you for the cheer. Synthad, Big Mac, thank you for following. Big Mac's actually going to be one of our guests later this evening. I am going to once again shift over. We're going to go right back to the kind of the BRB screen. I'm just going to get everything technically set up so that we can move into Kaltan, just so everybody does have kind of an idea what's going to happen. There will be another little 2-minute kind of segment where I recovered some of the info we've already covered, because that's where I'll actually be starting the audio. That becomes the audio only portion of our podcast. Thank you so much for that really quick, brief hold. Thank you so much for that Prime subscription to the channel. Silenas. um, So yeah, so really quick, going back into things, starting off, this is where the audio will actually begin for the podcast. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening for our first ever edition of Tavern Talks. Tavern Talks is your place to go to learn all the latest news, all the latest information about your favorite live action role playing games. Also, if you've never enjoyed a live action role playing game before, it's a place to learn about a variety of different games. See if there's something that might be of interest to you, or maybe you're part of a different game and just want to learn about other games that exist in the kind of the spectrum in the world of live action role playing. Amtgard is the game that our guests tonight, and both our one-on-one with Sir Kaltan and our on the grind with Big Mac and Oramus. These are people that come from Amtgard, so that's really going to be the focus tonight. You can learn more about Amtgard at www.amtgard.com. What makes Amtgard unique to me in the spectrum of live action role-playing games is you really run the spectrum from very sport to deep, immersive, always in character role play. Amtgard kind of is in between the two of those. Our gameplay on a week-to-week basis is closer to Overwatch. It's closer to League of Legends or an arena in MMO. We gain abilities. We can switch between classes and characters, and really a lot of our gameplay mechanics are built, fostered, grown from D&D, and really kind of around this fast-paced, almost sports-like gameplay. We have a big focus on our culture, arts and sciences, on combat, tournaments, one-on-one skill. Amtgard is a foam-based game, so we use very safe foam weaponry, but we use a lot of precision and skill versus hit points and the like. So we're about to kind of go into our first guest here in the tavern. We're going to bring them up to the stage. So give me a moment. We're going to switch over. I'm going to need to make sure their voice is enabled, make sure everything is good to go for them, make sure that they're able to kind of hear me and hear things. Okay, so give me one moment and I will switch over now. Bringing up a guest. Oh, that's not the right one. There we are. Little bit big. Let's get you reduced. Okay. There we are. Okay, let me go ahead and I'm going to switch over our audio and hopefully everything should be running. Can you hear me okay, Sir Kaltan?
I sure can.
Perfect. So our first guest this evening, doing a segment we're going to be calling One-on-One, is Sir Kaltan. Sir Kaltan comes to us, like I said, from Amtgard, actually comes to us from a region in Amtgard known as the Kingdom of the Northern Lights. So the way Amtgard is broken down is in regions. So for those of you who don't play Amtgard and don't know much about our regions, the Northern Lights encompasses the western part of Washington State. So Sir Kaltan actually comes from one of the duchies, one of the lands up there known as Greenwood Keep out of Olympia, Washington. Just for a little background on Kaltan and Amtgard, Amtgard is a democratically elected position, so we use the term like monarch, king, emperor, but we do as a people elect our monarchs. Kaltan has recently served as the monarch of Northern Lights, which means that they've kind of governed over the direction the game's gone. They were the monarch here at the start of the pandemic. Kaltan's also a warlord. Warlords are people who have, through martial combat of tournament, won enough tournaments, kind of demonstrate their skill, kind of proven themselves to be in the top 1%, or if not less, of combatants. It's one of the highest fighting awards for one-on-one tournament prowess. They're also a Knight of the Sword. Knighthood is obtained much as you think it would be in a LARP. It's a mixture of being a mentor, a teacher, having certain virtues and attitudes, but also demonstrating mastery of the past. So whereas a warlord is your sports star, your Tom Brady, your Ken Griffey Jr., a lifetime achievement of that is the knighthood. So a knight of the sword, like Sir Kaltan is somebody who has demonstrated both like the virtues of a knight in addition to just the pure skill level. So hopefully I've done a good enough job introducing you. If you want to say more about yourself, kind of how you came to Amtgard, kind of introduce yourself to the audience.
Okay. No, that's great. I think that's the first time I've ever been referred to or compared to like Ken Gifford Jr. and whatnot, but right on. Um, I started playing in 1990, 91 in Colorado, which is the Empire of the Iron Mountains. And then I moved up to Washington around 2000, year 2000, I think, 98, uh, something like that. And I've been, I don't know, playing the whole time. I took a short break. Well, not really a short break. I took like a 5 or 6 year break and then came back and started playing again.
Awesome. And just, a part of the show is kind of like like showing people like different ways people find their way to these LARPs because everybody comes from such different backgrounds. Having played the game for so long, what initially drew you to LARPing in general, and in Amtgard specifically as a game?
Well, when I first started, uh, my one of my brother's friends came over and said, "Hey, I found these guys at the park. You need to come and check this out because I think you'll like it." And so we went and we found all these guys beating each other up with, you know, foam padded swords and uh, having a good time at it. And that's how I found Amtgard. And I've been drawn to it ever since. One of the things I love about Amtgard is that uh, you can take it as far as you want to take it. If you just want to go and enjoy the combat aspect of it, then there's opportunities to do that. If you want to, fully immerse yourself in your character and everything, there's also opportunities to do that as well. And you can take it as far as you want in any aspect of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I kind of want to talk a little bit about that. So a lot of people in our game will refer to it as pillars. Just to kind of talk a little more about knighthood, because I think that's a big thing that people who don't LARP still have this kind of idea about. We, like I mentioned, have Knight of the Sword, which you yourself are, which is that kind of martial combat, the fighting aspect, like the pure martial fighting aspect. We have our Serpent Knights, which are for arts and sciences, leatherworking, making garb, beadwork, jewelry work, anything where you are crafting things, writing stories. We have Knight of the Flame, which is service based, so people who run our events, run our feasts, just help out around the game. And then Knight of the Crown, which is kind of our equivalent, so people know for leadership. So people who have been monarch, or we have arts and sciences officers, which we refer to as the prince, the princess, or the regent. We have records keepers, which we call our prime minister, and the people who kind of oversee the fighting we call champions. So those people who do those roles at the land and kingdom level, they can become crown knights. So you've already kind of touched on like how people can do like all these different aspects, and we already kind of covered how like you've been a monarch, and while we haven't gotten to it, you've been recently doing a lot of, maybe not even that recently, but a lot of different arts and sciences. So you're a very well-rounded person, but obviously your first kind of, I guess, initial path or draw seems to be fighting. Can you kind of talk what about Amtgard fighting is kind of like really unique as far as like you can go play basketball, people can jog. There's all sorts of kind of athletic pursuits. What makes kind of Amtgard combat like a unique sport like or kind of martial pursuit?
Oh wow. For me, it was more the skill, I guess. Um, it's a lot of hand-eye coordination, um, but also you also have to have decent cardio and good flexibility. Otherwise, you're going to end up injuring yourself. Um, but it's for me, it was more of the uh, one-on-one, my skill versus your skill, my talent versus your talent, and whoever came out on top that day. Because fighters have good days and they have bad days, and some have better days than others. Um, so it's all uh, a challenge, and it's very competitive, and I like the competition.
Awesome. And outside of the realm of live action role playing, outside of Amcard, um, have you ever kind of competed? Like, were you as a youth or even now as an adult, like sports driven? Like, did you participate in other kind of like athletic pursuits, or is like Amcard kind of been the primary sort of like outlet for that kind of, I guess, competitive, physical competitiveness?
Well, when I was younger, I played a lot of football. Um, I wasn't really, starter material, but I played a lot of football, and I also did a lot of marathons, or not really marathons, but a lot of runs. Uh, so I did a lot of running and whatnot when I was younger. These days, I don't do as much. uh, just old age and other priorities.
That's fair. Obviously, as people grow and as we get older, we have more and more priorities, things that take us away from that. The reason I kind of brought it up is just for those who might be on the outside looking in to something like Amtgard, similar games. I guess would be like Dega here, Belagarth, things like that that have kind of the more skill based combat. Skill based isn't the right term, but more precision based, not hit points, but like shot location. Um, how would you liken basically the amount of physical preparation, training, I guess, commitment it takes to kind of excel at a top fighting level, like someone like a warlord has to say what you experienced when you were putting effort into football as well?
I think I put a lot more effort into Amtgard than I did into football. Um, I did a lot more stretching, uh, and I don't know, a lot more practice. I don't, I hated doing drills when I was younger. Um, they just bored me to death. But I did do a lot of shot location training and what we call a tip control. Um, and I would practice using my range and only hitting with like the top 8 inches of my sword or less. And that was one of my uh, things that I wanted to be able to control, so I didn't, hit people in the head when I was going for shots to the shoulder. Um, but I wanted to be able to, control where my sword was going a lot more.
Awesome. Thank you for kind of that insight into the physicality and the training behind it. I want to kind of shift just gears just a little bit, kind of go back to you kind of mentioned what brought you to the game. What has kept you? Like obviously, like you said, as people get older, we get more priorities. Family, work, and so having free time can become somewhat of a commodity. So what after decades, basically, when you do have the free time, like you mentioned, you did take a break. What makes Amtgard the sort of like club or organization, LARP, however you want to phrase it, that brings you back, that actually gets you to take some of that kind of precious free time you have now as an adult and still put it into the club?
Um, I have this, uh, I don't know, it's an addiction to Amtgard. Um, I I enjoy it a lot, and it's very therapeutic for me. It's a place where I can relax and get some aggravations out by hitting someone without getting in trouble. Um, but you know, it's an enjoyment factor. It's I don't know, it's something that I love to do. I continue to enjoy it, um, and I like teaching. I like uh, I like testing myself. I like trying new things, especially within the organization. I like, if you're not trying to grow, then you're going to become stagnant. So I'm always looking to better myself and try and better the organization.
Awesome. And yeah, to that effect, one of the things I want to go into as far as bettering the organization is we can't really obviously have a podcast or talks or anything really about live action role playing games about Amtgard right now without stating the obvious, which is we are in a pandemic. Obviously, part of live action role playing is live action. Um, to that effect, something that you've been doing during the pandemic that I think is really cool, I want to call attention to and kind of talk about how you got started doing it is you started a Discord group called Kaltan's Corner where you bring people together just to have conversations, maybe talk about things. Can you talk a little bit about what Kaltan's Corner is, how you kind of came to have that idea, and how that's really been helping, in your opinion, during this like pandemic time when we can't go out and hit each other with foam swords or participate in the culture of it in person?
Right. So with the pandemic, um, we've come to a position within life where we can't be social as we want to be, and Amtgard has gotten to a place um, where all our rules clarifications, our toxicity, our flame wars, and everything that all happened on online interaction, and people would go to the park days and release all that in built up irritation and everything. And then when the pandemic hit, that's all we have now is the online interaction. Um, and so I started doing Facebook live videos and just talking and trying to, do a couple lessons through Facebook live videos, and um, just trying to keep people interested and involved with Amtgard. But I wasn't getting that great of a response. Um, and I wasn't interacting with anyone. It was just me talking to a camera. And so I started doing Colton's Corner, and I chose Wednesdays to do it because I didn't want to interfere with any of the kingdom scheduling or any of the land scheduling, but I just wanted a place where Amtgarders can come, hang out, and talk, get something off their back, and just try to enforce positive reinforcement on the organization. It's still here, it's still moving, there's still Amtgard. Um, and we're here. I'm here to, well, not necessarily entertain, but exchange and conversation and help as much as I can.
Very cool. Yeah, and I do think that's I agree with you. It's super important, especially during these times. It's very easy with any club, with anything. You can see it all throughout basically the world, not just with live action role playing, like without being able to meet in person, without being able to play the game in a lot of cases, you kind of build up that toxicity and that aggression, like you said, kind of spills out. So I think having those outlets and creating an outlet like you did with Discord that lets people kind of have that to communicate, to ask questions, to know that there's still community here, even when the game itself isn't happening. And I do want to talk a little bit more about the pandemic. And like I mentioned, in our game in Amtgard, other than some kingdoms up in, I believe there's one up in Alaska, for the most part, when you're elected to serve as monarch, you oversee all the different lands. It can be anywhere from, some kingdoms have less land, some have more, but it can be between like 5 to 10 to more lands. Basically, however many different chapters you have in your region. So, and you're no longer monarch, but can you speak what it was like having to be the person who governed over, you know, Seattle, Olympia, this, the Western Washington section of Amtgard? When you started your reign, obviously as monarch, you could still meet, but then all of a sudden you kind of transitioned to not being able to meet. What that was like, how that transition, how you handled that, what that was like how you saw the game kind of change in those kind of early months of pandemic before it started kind of wearing on here into the winter months.
Right. Well, at the beginning of the year, we didn't think it would last as long as it has. And when I was stepping down out of office, it was like the last month and a half of my office as monarch that the pandemic really took place and we weren't allowed to socialize anymore. It was more of a scramble to make sure that everything happened when it was supposed to happen. Like a coronation event, we had to scramble to get a Facebook Live video going with the incoming and the outgoing monarchy, give everybody time to talk, make sure that the events that or the campsites that we had scheduled, that we were able to, get the finances refunded for that. Make sure there was no like cancellation fees and all that kind of jargon. But it was more of a like I said, a scramble to get everything squared away because it was something that we never had to deal with before anywhere within the history of Amtgard, let alone anywhere else. So it was definitely an experience.
That's really fair. Yeah, it's obviously something no one has ever had to deal with. I mean, like you said, in the history of our game, I don't know if any, actually doubt any LARP, given the nature, unprecedented nature of the pandemics, had to deal with this sort of thing. And just so there might be people who listen to this later who are stepping into leadership roles in their lands, or maybe they're not even playing Amtgard, but they're in a position where they're part of a club. Is there any advice as you've like done Kaltan's Corner, as you were monarch, like you said, for the first month and a half of this, as you've seen other leaders kind of, it's all the learning process, nobody knows what to do, but stumbling blocks, is there any like advice that you would have for people, who are trying to manage their social groups, be it an Amtgard kingdom, an Amtgard land, or even just a small like social group?
Um, well, communication. Communication is, key. You have to be on the ball with your communication, and if you're like a kingdom level monarch, talking with your land level monarchy, on a bi-weekly or monthly basis, making sure that they are talking to their lands to, just to keep their people involved. So just, it's a lot like normal. You still have to do your planning. You still have to do all your organization and your planning of your reign or your whatever it is that you're planning on running, but you still need to talk to everybody. And since you can't do it in person, you need to come up with ways on communicating your thoughts and getting everybody together on the same page so that everything still can be run smoothly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for providing that advice to anybody who might be listening or listen in the future and is interested in that. I want to kind of stay on the focus of community, but kind of roll back from like the pandemic talks, because obviously we've both been around for decades. I kind of want to talk about like Amtgard as unique as a social club. Like obviously we've talked a little bit about the fighting, we've brought up the other aspects that get people maybe towards knighthood. But I think Amtgard provides a really interesting kind of social club. If you and I, even with some shared interests, had just gone through life, we never would have met each other because just having similar nerd interests doesn't necessarily mean you're going to meet people with a live action role playing game. Especially with Amtgard, there's so much travel. Like you started in Colorado, you came to the Pacific Northwest. Throughout your time in Amtgard, you've traveled all over the place. I'm just curious your thoughts on how you see the benefits or maybe even some of the drawbacks of being part of a social club that brings people from so many walks of life and also lets you kind of intermingle in person with people from all over the country.
Oh, wow. Amtgard has changed socially throughout the decades. And it's starting as an organization, it's starting to change and evolve, especially on a social aspect. We now have the COC rules, where we can actually follow through and have disciplinary action for individuals who are unsafe or provide a unsafe environment for the organization. I don't think those rules are perfect, but they're better than what we had 10 years ago. So we're seeing a lot of backlash with those rules, because it's upsetting the I don't know, it's the status quo, of before Amtgard was, 10 years ago, but Amtgard was accepting everybody and anything, and all behaviors were acceptable, or they weren't acceptable, but there was no disciplinary actions for things that happened. So it's gone from everything is okay to now there's consequences, and it's a culture shock for a lot of the Amtgarders because they're not used to having repercussions for their actions. So yeah, I think I've gotten off topic and I've forgotten how far to go.
No, it's fine. Like the kind of purpose of this is to kind of go in any directions and kind of see where the conversation takes us anyway. It's interesting, just for people who are not part of Amtgard, COC, shorthand for Code of Conduct. In the last few years, we implemented a kind of a code of conduct to the overall game. Like this is how we would want people to, behave, things like that. Not too off kilter for organizations, and just to kind of link what Kaltan is saying here to, I think, the greater world, because I think what we're going through is not just a cultural shift in LARP, in Amtgard, but a cultural shift in the greater kind of sense of the world. My cat's anyway, sorry about that. because earlier this year we see a very similar the Super Smash Brothers community. It's a video gaming community, but I had a lot of like people speaking out. There was a lot of misogyny. There was a lot of sexual harassment, things like that in that community. We've seen it like in pro wrestling communities. So it's kind of the state of the world where a lot of, for lack of a better term, like nerd hobbies have always been, in my opinion, I've spoke about it on past streams, but not on the podcast. A lot of them have been kind of like nerd culture in the 90s, especially 80s, 90s, early 2000s was really like, we have to accept everybody because we're excluded from, a lot of us were excluded from, you know, cliques at school, or just kind of like nerd culture wasn't pop culture the way it is now. And we got it in our heads as we can't exclude anybody because we're an inclusive culture with nerd culture as a whole, gaming, be it video games, D&D, LARP. And now we're kind of in that kind of backlash phase where it's been accepted for so long. We're trying to swing the pendulum the other way. And sometimes it does, you know, can swing too far because we're still finding our bearings to course correct and go, okay, we can't accept everybody because that creates its own kind of level of exclusion. At least that's kind of my opinion of things. So I don't think we're too far into the weeds as far as that goes. And that's definitely something that was going on in Amtgard pre-pandemic, and obviously during pandemic, you know, all we can do is, like you said, in a lot of cases be online. So it's been kind of at the forefront of things. To kind of like, not to shift away from that, because I think it is a very important subject, but I think we covered it really thoroughly. And just to kind of talk about a few other things, I want to make sure that we kind of cover a lot of things. Is, you know, we talked a lot about fighting, being as you're a warlord. That's the kind of that one-on-one skill that, like, if you watch like a Knight's Tale, that tournament style fighting, you know, no armor, no abilities, just two people testing their skill with a set, you know, regulation of like short swords or, you know, sword and shield and things like that. But a huge part of Amtgard, like I mentioned at the start of the podcast before I brought you on, is, you know, we have classes similar to like D&D or League of Legends or, you know, an MMO, and we have battle games. I just kind of like, I like to hear people's thoughts, because some people are here just for that kind of like hard, you know, tournament style fighting. Some people are here just for the social aspects or the arts and sciences. I think Amtgard is very unique in the way we do battle games. So I was just curious your thoughts on, you know, that part of it, the game part of our club.
I enjoy battle games and questing immensely, um, because it allows people that aren't as athletic, or the people that don't take the sport aspect of the fighting. It levels out the playing field for them to compete at, you know, on the same level as everybody else. Um, you know, with your class abilities, your armor, all that is all taken into account, because you don't have any of that in the tournaments. You don't, you know, you can't wear armor in the tournaments. You can't, you know, you can't cast spells or any of that. And so it kind of levels out the playing field. I might be a better fighter than the opposing team, but if the opposing team is wearing, you know, armor and I'm not wearing any armor, and there's two of them, well, I have to hit them, you know, 2 to 3 times as much in order to succeed in that battle. So I enjoy battle games a lot, because it's a lot more challenging, and it's just a different aspect of the game, um, and that we all play.
Yeah. I would say it's, to me at least, kind of the meat and potatoes, to use that phrase, of what we do. Because while you don't have to engage in that part, it's, I'd say a vast majority of people do. And just to kind of segue in that, for those who are tuning in, who are listening, who don't participate in this LARP or maybe haven't LARPed before, Amtgard uses a class system. I like to always compare it to World of Warcraft, but you can compare it to D&D a number of things where people choose a class. Those classes have abilities. Wizards have spells. Warriors can wear a ton of armor and shrug off certain spells. Bards can like sing songs, literally physically sing songs to create certain effects on the battlefield. And that's what kind of makes Amtgard unique to, say, the other combat-based LARPs, such as Belgrath or Dega here, which don't have the classes. They just have that kind of or hit location-based combat, but also still unique from your really immersive LARPs like your Nero or your Alliance, where they have hit points and your characters build so much. Because in Amtgard, so people know, we only have 6 levels, and you can switch between classes from game to game, kind of like re-kitting yourself in MMO or picking a new champion of League of Legends. So really, after you hit 6th level, which you get from playing for roughly a year or so, you've unlocked all the abilities of that class and can switch between classes. And so it's really this kind of halfway point between that immersive, like if I've played Alliance for 3 years, this immersive LARP, I'm probably way more powerful than somebody who just started. In Amtgard, if everybody's played a year, they have the same abilities, and somebody might be better because they've honed their abilities, but not because they've played longer necessarily. And that's what I always thought was unique and cool, just for my own kind of take on that. And then another thing I wanted to kind of talk about with culture-wise, just because it gets brought up a lot when I talk about LARPs online outside of kind of the Twitch platform, and I talk to people who haven't necessarily done LARPs before, is how the game works on like a week-to-week basis or, an event basis. And so I've already kind of talked a little bit at the start, each land in the different cities meets weekly. They do these battle games. A big thing we do with events is campouts. And I wanted to kind of talk about that and get your take, Kaltan, on campout culture, I guess. And not so much like the good, the bad, and the ugly of campout culture, but what kind of makes, maybe somebody who's been camping before, maybe even done an immersive LARP before, what kind of makes an Amtgard campout shine, or what kind of, how it brings out the different elements of our game differently than like a weekly practice.
So campouts draw a lot of people because it's 3 to 4 days of Amtgard, and sometimes the events have a theme, which will play out with their theme. And there's like one of the things I enjoy about campouts is that there's always more than one thing that could be going on at any given time. Like there could be an arts and sciences competition going on at the same time as a quest, at the same time as a ditch line, at the same time as just hanging out with your friends. I mean, it all could be happening at the exact same time. And if you don't want to participate in one thing, you can participate with another thing. And you can really just pick and choose on what you want to participate in, or if you really want and spend the entire 4 days doing nothing but fighting and sleeping, then or eating, sleeping, then that's definitely an option, because there's always people there that are wanting to fight. There's always people there wanting to play the game. There's always people there willing and wanting to socialize. Campouts just bring the community of lands regionally and nationally to one area and says, hey, we all play this game. We're doing it together at this event for this campout for this many days.
Yeah, that's really great. And just so people have an idea of kind of the numbers, campouts, like your average practice, depending on the city you hail from, can be anywhere from 5 people upwards of 60 people, just in the Pacific Northwest, the kind of range in people. But our campouts generally can be anywhere from smaller land campouts, like around 100 people. We have some campouts that we do annually that can crest 300 people. And then, as Kaltan mentioned, national events are a completely different thing. We have things like Gathering of the Clans, Spring War, Keep. These are these major national events, and they can draw over 1,000 people at various times depending on what else is going on. So they can get pretty large for those who haven't been to a camp out or a LARP camp out. So yeah, so before we kind of go to Q&A, and if anybody has questions or comments, go ahead and post them there. Kind of the last thing I want to talk on, I mentioned at the start, is knighthood. So basically, everybody, whether they play Amtgard or they play a different LARP or they've never played a LARP, I think everybody has some idea from films, movies, books, or if they play LARPs from that LARP, what knighthood means. We kind of know within our game, like it's a lifetime achievement award, and it varies somewhat person to person what that means to them. So kind of in your own words, not like speaking about knighthood and different knights specifically, but to you, like, what does knighthood within our game like mean? And what's your kind of vision of it? In like an idealized sort of way, knowing that it can vary from person to person, or maybe our current status of knighthood might not meet your kind of idealized vision of what you would like it to be.
Well, yeah, everyone has their own ideals and their own perspective on what knighthood is and what it's supposed to represent. And that can go from one night to the next. My perspective on knighthood is that it's a term of service. It's the kingdom recognizing you and saying you've excelled at this certain skill for so long that we've given you your masterhood in this skill, whether it be a warlord or master rose or master serpent, master owl, master crown, whatever masterhood it is, that's your prestige, that's the pillar that you stand on. And then once you receive that white belt, that's your time to give back to the organization. You've spent your entire Amtgard career leading up to and excelling and trying to get as good as you can at what it is you're doing. That now it's time for you to take that knowledge that you've honed and teach the next generation, and teach the people that are up and coming, and teach the people that are wanting to aspire and grow and do better themselves, and help them along the way, like the future generations of knights have done for other people.
Awesome. And then one more question before we go to one more question from me before we go to any Q&A from the people watching live, is the next segment we're going to do a little bit later is with people who are on the grind, is what we're calling the segment, but up and comers who are striving, who are kind of getting close to that master level, that warlord level, whatever it may be. And what advice would you give to anybody who is, that's their goal they've set for themselves? They want to attain mastery and they eventually want to be a knight. What is like one good solid piece of advice that you would impart to anybody who's making that a goal for themselves?
Don't make knighthood your end all be all. Knighthood is not end game. There is no end game for Amtgard. If you're if your goal is to reach knighthood and only knighthood, it's my personal belief that you're looking at it wrong. I think you should be more focusing on getting as good as you can at your set of skills that you've set yourself for, and trying to obtain that masterhood. When I was up and coming, it wasn't my goal to become a knight. My goal was never to be a knight of the sword. My goal was, to be known nationally as a good fighter, and to put the Northwest on the map, um, as producing good fighters. So knighthood isn't the end of the game. Knighthood isn't, um, the final tick on that checklist. Because once you get it, your friends